Ethan Walker watched as Clint Rogers stepped out of his truck, unloading boxes with quiet efficiency. Ethan. The wooden cross that blazed on Clint's front lawn 3 nights later was only their introduction. Their way of explaining how things, but what Ethan's crew couldn't see beneath Clint's calm demeanor, was 18 years of Special Forces training, a lifetime of controlled lethality hidden. So when torches lit up the night and shadows closed in around his farmhouse, they thought they were teaching Clint Rogers fear. Instead, he was about to give them a brutal lesson in survival. Clint Rogers tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the gravel popped under the tires of his black pickup. The narrow road curved like a snake through the Georgia countryside, sunlight breaking through branches of oak trees older than the town itself. To anyone else, it might have looked like a sleepy piece of farmland, forgotten by progress. But to Clint, it looked like a fresh start. After 18 years in Special Forces, he didn't need much. 4 walls, a roof, a piece of land to work with his own hands. He pulled into the drive, dust settling around him, and stepped out, boots crunching on the stones. The farmhouse ahead stood weathered but proud, its white paint faded, the wraparound porch creaking as if eager to welcome someone again after years of silence. "This will do just fine," Clint murmured, tugging a heavy duffel bag from the bed of his truck. His voice carried the certainty of a man who had seen enough war zones to know peace when it stood in front of him. He set the bag down, inhaled deeply, and felt, for the first time in years, that maybe this was a place he could belong. Millbrook, Georgia. Didn't look like much when he first rolled through. One main street, a diner with lace curtains in the windows, a hardware store with a rusting sign that squealed in the wind, and the First National Bank that still clung to its 1950s brick facade. American flags hung from lampposts, fluttering dutifully. Clint's boots hit the hardware store floorboards that first day, the bell above the door chiming with a cheer it didn't mean. Conversation stopped. 3 men in dusty work clothes turned their heads in unison, eyes fixed, tracking his every move. He felt the silence like a weight pressing on his shoulders, the same kind of silence that settled over villages he'd patrolled overseas before the ambush came. "Help you find something?" the clerk asked, voice flat, neutral, eyes not meeting his. "Just browsing," Clint replied, keeping his tone casual. He picked up a hammer, nails, a deadbolt lock, basic supplies for a man who wanted nothing more than to fix up a house. At the counter, the clerk finally spoke again. "You the one bought the Henderson place?" "That's right." The words hung like smoke. Henderson had been gone for 2 years. The property vacant. The clerk's face twitched. "Shame to see it sit empty so long." Clint slid cash across the counter, gave a polite nod, and left. But as he pushed the door open, he caught the whispers behind him. Paid cash, city money, maybe Atlanta. Wonder what he plans to do with all that land. He had heard men talk like that before, always in half-hushed tones, always when they thought suspicion was easier than curiosity. At Daisy's diner, the air felt lighter. Betty Hawthorne, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied in a neat bun, poured him coffee and smiled like he was human, not a stranger. "You must be our new neighbor," she said warmly. "Clint Rogers," he replied, shaking her hand. "Well, Mr. Rogers, welcome to Millbrook. Folks here can be slow to warm up. Don't take it personal." Clint's gaze met hers, and he caught the flicker in her eyes, a warning she didn't quite speak out loud. He nodded anyway. He knew coded language when he heard it. "Appreciate the advice," he said. That night, alone on the porch of his farmhouse, Clint watched the sun dip behind the ridges, crickets chirping, a dog barking far off. For a moment it was almost perfect, but from the tree line, a camera lens gleamed, catching his silhouette in the fading light. Someone was already watching. Ethan Walker nursed a beer in an abandoned barn 8 miles away, the lantern glow throwing sharp angles across his face. 47 acres, he spat, right in the heart of our county. And nobody thought to tell me until after the deed was signed? His voice dripped with venom, every word sharpened by resentment. Around him, a handful of men shifted in their folding chairs. Ray Peters with his yellow teeth, Carl Dixon with grease still caked under his nails, and Frank Miller in his pressed khakis, the only one who looked out of place. They were united by one thing, fear of change. Ethan's fist slammed the table. One man comes in, then his family, then his friends. Before you know it, we got a whole different kind of neighborhood. Carl cleared his throat nervously. What are you suggesting we do? Ethan leaned forward, eyes glinting. I'm suggesting we remind him how things work around here. Start small, let him know he's being watched, then escalate until he gets the picture. In the shadows outside, Betty Hawthorne had come searching for her runaway cat and froze when she heard. She pressed a hand to her mouth, heart pounding. These weren't just bitter men complaining. They were planning something. The first sign arrived the next morning. A wooden cross, barely 2 feet tall, planted in Clint's yard. Not burned, not elaborate, just a warning. He pulled it up without a word, carried it into his workshop, and laid it on the bench. Years of service had taught him to recognize patterns. Step 1, intimidation. Step 2 would be worse. He opened his laptop, documented every detail. Date, time, construction, suspects. Old habits from military intelligence work. Document everything. Trust nothing to memory. Within days, the harassment escalated. His mailbox was knocked down twice, once smashed so badly he had to set the post in concrete. Tires slashed at the grocery store. Phone calls in the dead of night. Slurs, threats, heavy breathing. He logged each incident. Deputy Jake Morrison stopped by one morning, his young face tense, offering a business card with his personal number. Day or night, he said. Clint studied the card after the cruiser left. He'd learned long ago that when law enforcement offered help before you asked, it usually meant they expected you'd need it. By Friday, Ethan Walker decided to make it personal. At Murphy's Hardware, Clint was buying hinges and another lock when a heavy-set man stepped in front of him, blocking the exit. You the one bought the Henderson place? That's right. Clint kept his tone even, his eyes steady. Name's Ethan Walker, the man said, not offering a hand. Been hearing a lot about you? All good things, I hope, Clint replied. Ethan laughed, bitter and sharp. Depends on your perspective. Some folks think you'd be happier somewhere else. Clint's jaw tightened. I'm plenty happy where I am. Ethan leaned closer, breath thick with beer and tobacco. Funny thing about happiness, it can disappear real quick when you ain't where you belong. The store went silent. Customers pretended to browse, but every ear strained for the words. Clint asked evenly, Where exactly do you think I belong? Ethan's voice rose. Atlanta, Detroit, anywhere but here. This is our home. We protect what's ours. Clint felt the calm before the storm settled over him. His vision sharpened. His pulse slowed. It was the same clarity he felt before firefights overseas. I'm a retired soldier who paid cash for his land and minds his own business. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with me. Ethan's hand twitched toward his belt, where the glint of a knife handle showed. You think that uniform makes you better than us? Clint stepped forward, close enough for only Ethan to hear. It makes me someone who fought for the right of every American to live where they choose. He let the words hang, then walked past, pushing into the daylight. Ethan's growl followed him. We'll see about that. That night, Clint sat on his porch with the sunset glowing red through the trees, phone pressed to his ear. His sister Rose's voice filled the quiet. Marcus, she still called him by his middle name. Marcus, are you safe out there? I'm fine, he lied. Just adjusting to small-town politics. She wasn't fooled. Promise me if it gets worse, you'll call. He promised, though both knew promises didn't stop danger. After they hung up, he checked the locks, tested the pistol he kept in a locked case. then settled with property maps spread on the table. He was still studying the layout when the crunch of multiple engines echoed down his driveway. 6 trucks, forming a wall across his exit, shadows with torches fanned out, encircling the house. Clint killed the lights, crouched low. Through the curtains, he saw Ethan Walker leading the pack, his face lit orange by fire. A rock shattered the front window, glass raining across the floor. A voice bellowed, "Time to talk. Rogers." Clint had seconds. He could barricade and burn, or step outside into 8 against 1. Another Molotov smashed through the back window, fire licking across the kitchen floor. Smoke curled thick, choking. His choice was made for him. He kicked open the front door, rolled onto the porch, pistol raised. The first man dropped instantly. The second staggered back wounded. But then a tire iron cracked against his wrist, the gun spinning into darkness. Clubs and chains rained down. He fought, dropping 2 more, knees and elbows moving with lethal efficiency. But 8 men against 1 was math even special forces couldn't beat. The last thing Clint saw was Ethan Walker standing over him, tire iron dripping with blood, his house blazing behind him. "Welcome to Millbrook," Ethan sneered, and brought the iron down. Darkness swallowed Clint Rogers. Clint Rogers woke to the taste of blood and rust in his mouth, his body cataloging injuries before his mind caught up. Ribs on the left side broken, shoulder dislocated, scalp split where the tire iron had connected. Every breath was fire in his chest. He forced his eyes open. Moonlight filtered through warped wooden slats overhead. Dust motes drifted in pale beams, the air thick with the smell of old hay, oil, and sweat. His arms were stretched above him, wrists shackled to a heavy chain bolted into a century-old support beam. He tested the restraints with the slow patience of a man who'd done this before. The metal cut into his skin, solid and deliberate. Whoever chained him here hadn't been guessing. Voices drifted from outside. Laughter, nervous and mean. Beer bottles clinking. Clint slowed his breathing and listened. "Should have finished him at his house," one said. The reply came nasal, tense. Tommy wanted him to suffer first. The names shifted through his memory. Men from town, men who had stared too long at the diner, who whispered at the hardware store. Ethan Walker was at the center. Of course, always the loudest voice, always needing others to echo him. The barn door creaked open, hinges shrieking. Ethan stepped inside, lantern light painting deep shadows across his scarred face. Behind him shuffled Frank Miller, the bank president who had sat silent at the meeting. The banker's neat shirt was untucked now, his complexion pale as paper. Ethan's voice cut the stillness. "Jesus, Frank, don't look so sick. You've been writing checks for years. Now you get to see what those checks bought." Frank's hands shook around a leather briefcase. This is kidnapping. Ethan, federal charges. We can't." Ethan's hand lashed out, backhanding him hard across the mouth. The sound cracked like a rifle shot in the barn. "You're in this as deep as the rest of us. Don't you forget it." Clint lifted his head, eyes opening fully. His voice came calm, steady, stripped of fear. "Not hard enough, apparently." Ethan turned, startled by the quiet defiance, then smiled, a predator amused that its prey still had teeth. "Good, you're awake. I like that. Makes this interesting." He dragged a chair close, sat facing Clint, lantern light dancing in his eyes. "You came to our town thinking you could just take what you wanted. Our land, our way of life." Clint shifted his wrist subtly, feeling for a give in the chain. "I paid the asking price in cash. Didn't steal a thing." Ethan leaned forward, his breath sour with alcohol. "Money ain't the only currency that matters. Respect, belonging, those got to be earned. And you'll never belong here." Frank fumbled with the briefcase, pulling out a sheaf of papers. Ethan gestured. "Here's the deal. Rogers, you sign over that deed. You leave Millbrook tonight, and maybe you drive away alive. Refuse. He glanced toward the door, where shadows moved. Accidents happen. Barn fires, outsiders who disappear. Sad. Really. Clint's eyes tracked the men beyond Ethan, weighing numbers, angles. 4 inside, more outside. Too many. But he'd learned long ago that shackles weren't the enemy. The weak link was always human error. He flexed against the chain again. Tiny, deliberate movements. The eye bolt groaned faintly in the wood. Rotten beam, old iron, a flaw. He just needed time. So what's it going to be? Ethan asked, voice rising. Easy way or hard way? Clint stared straight through him. I need time to think. Ethan's laugh was sharp. Time's up. He nodded to Frank. Get the papers ready. As Frank fumbled, Clint put his weight into one final surge. The rusted eye bolt screamed and tore free from the beam with a splintering crack. He stumbled forward, 6 feet of heavy chains still attached to his wrists. But free? He's loose! Ray Peters shouted from the doorway. Chaos erupted. Clint swung the chain like a flail, catching Carl Dixon square in the chest and dropping him to the dirt. Ethan lunged with his knife, but Clint trapped the arm, drove his knee into Ethan's gut, and twisted hard. Ethan folded with a grunt, knife clattering to the ground. Frank screamed and bolted for the door, only to find Ray blocking the way. Shotgun raised, panic in his eyes. Nobody move! Clint froze, chain coiled in his hands, Ethan gasping at his feet. 4 against 1 again, but this time he wasn't bolted to the floor. He smiled coldly. Drop the chain, Ray demanded, his voice quivering. Sure, Clint said softly, but you should know something first. He let the words drip with controlled menace. I'm not some random victim. I'm a special forces operator who spent 18 years hunting men exactly like you. I know your names, your faces, where you live. And now, I know what you're capable of. The barn fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Ray's finger trembled on the trigger. Ethan groaned on the ground, struggling to rise, but the balance had shifted. For the first time, fear flashed in their eyes. Clint didn't waste it. He lunged, dragging Ethan into his grip as a shield. The shotgun roared, pellets tearing splinters from the barn wall. But Clint was already moving, wrapping the chain around his fist and driving it into Ray's temple. The mechanic crumpled. Carl tried to rise, wheezing from broken ribs, and Clint kicked him back down. 30 seconds later, the barn floor was littered with groaning bodies. Frank had vanished into the night, briefcase abandoned. Clint stood alone, breath ragged, still shackled but no longer anyone's prisoner. He grabbed the shotgun, slung it, and scooped up the briefcase. Without another word, he slipped into the dark. The night air hit his lungs sharp and clean, a reminder he was alive. The education was only beginning. He moved through the forest like a shadow, every step deliberate. 2 miles in, he found the hunting cabin he'd scouted weeks earlier during his surveys. A forgotten shack on state land, invisible from the road, with clear sight lines in all directions. He forced the rusty door open and slipped inside. The floor creaked under his boots, but it was shelter. He laid the shotgun on the table, set the briefcase beside it, and finally allowed himself to breathe. His wrists bled from the shackles. His ribs screamed with every movement, but his mind was already turning. First priority, intelligence. Always intelligence. He cracked the briefcase, bank records, property deeds, names scrawled across rosters with dollar amounts beside them. At the top, Millbrook Heritage Society, 12 members, local leaders, addresses, phone numbers, even family details. Ethan Walker, Ray Peters, Carl Dixon, Frank Miller. Others he hadn't met but already suspected. It wasn't just a handful of drunks in a barn. This was organized, funded, connected. Clint photographed every page, uploading them through an encrypted channel he'd kept alive since his military days. Old habits, always have backup. Always assume compromise. When dawn broke, Clint stepped outside, scanning the tree line. His enemies thought he was broken, on the run, but they didn't realize they'd unleashed a man who had lived 2 decades mastering the art of survival. The shackles still dangled from his wrists, iron clinking softly in the breeze, but he smiled grimly. By the time the sun set again, he would turn their hunt into his. The morning sun cut through the canopy in slanted beams as Clint Rogers cleaned the blood from his wrists with a rag he'd torn from his shirt. The chain marks bit deep into his skin, raw and angry, but the sting only sharpened his focus. He sat at the rickety table in the abandoned hunting cabin, the shotgun within reach, the briefcase open before him. Each paper was a thread, and Clint knew how to pull threads until an entire web collapsed. He photographed the bank ledgers, the rosters, the contribution notes that spelled out who had been paying for hate in Millbrook. Every page he uploaded, encrypted and hidden beyond their reach. Evidence was good, but evidence alone didn't stop men like Ethan Walker. Fear did. By noon, he was already moving. The forest covered his approach, each step measured like the 1,000 silent patrols he had walked in villages where every shadow could hide an ambush. His first target was Ray Peters. Ray lived above the auto parts store on Main Street, a tired old brick building with a crooked sign and a fire escape that had rusted into the wall decades ago. Clint watched from across the street that night, hat low, jacket collar up. Midnight came, and with it, the silence of a town too used to pretending not to see. He moved quickly, scaling the fire escape, slipping through the window latch with nothing more than a pocket blade. Ray snored loud enough to mask any noise. Clint ghosted through the small apartment, eyes adjusting, senses alive. The place smelled of oil and unwashed clothes. In the closet, he found shelves stacked with ammunition boxes, Confederate flags folded with careful reverence, and a trunk of photographs, hooded men at rallies, torches raised, proof. He rifled through a desk drawer and struck gold, a leather-bound address book, names and numbers scrawled in messy ink, including contacts well beyond Millbrook, Alabama, Tennessee, even North Carolina. This wasn't a local sickness. It was a network. Clint slipped 3 tiny listening devices into the apartment, under the couch, behind the TV, and in the closet near the ammunition. He took nothing else, leaving Ray to snore on, oblivious. By the time the first trucks rumbled past at dawn, Clint was already back in the forest, monitoring live feeds from a tablet he'd lifted from the barn. 2 nights later, Carl Dixon's house became the next classroom. Carl fancied himself a family man, wife, teenage daughter, neat little ranch house at the edge of town, but his home office told another story. Clint bypassed the alarm system in less than a minute. It was a cheap kit, wires exposed. Inside the office, he found digital records of correspondence with other groups, payments for weapons, plans for rallies. He copied everything onto portable drives. He left the family bedrooms untouched, a silent line between the guilty and the innocent. Before leaving, he planted cameras in vents and motion sensors near the office door. Carl would never know every word he spoke at home was now feeding into Clint's growing web of intelligence. Tommy Briggs had been the one to gloat over him, to swing the tire iron, but Ethan Walker was the true believer, the center of the fire. Clint studied his routines for 3 days from a distance. Ethan's trailer sat on a bare lot, sight lines clear in every direction, a paranoid man's fortress. But paranoia doesn't equal discipline. Clint waited until 3 hours, when Ethan's snores rattled the thin metal walls, then slipped through a back window like smoke. Inside was an arsenal, rifles lined in neat rows, homemade explosives, maps marked with potential targets, black churches, Jewish-owned businesses, families in nearby counties. But Clint's eyes narrowed on something else, messages printed and saved, communications between Ethan and Frank Miller, bank transfers, instructions. Federal crimes in black and white. He photographed everything. Then, on a whim, he left a gift, a single Polaroid of Ethan sleeping, placed neatly on the nightstand. When Ethan woke and saw it, he'd know someone had been standing inches from him. Watching, the message was clear. You're not the hunter anymore. By week's end, Clint had turned their network inside out. Listening devices crackled with conversations full of fear. Cameras streamed proof of their cowardice. Every document, every message, every whispered word was being captured. But Clint wasn't just gathering evidence. He was waging psychological war. The mailbox Ray had repainted turned up smashed in the morning. Carl's prized Ford pickup was stripped down to its frame overnight, left like a skeleton in his driveway. Ethan opened his gun safe one morning to find it empty. Every weapon vanished without a trace. Each act was surgical, precise, designed not to kill, but to remind them they were powerless. Panic spread through the group like fire in dry grass. Clint listened from the cabin as Ray's voice shook over the wire. He's everywhere. Took my guns. Carl's truck, like ghosts. Ethan snarled back. He ain't no ghost. He's one man, and one man bleeds like anyone else. But even Ethan's fury couldn't mask the edge of fear in his tone. Frank Miller, the banker, had stopped coming to meetings altogether. Clint caught his voice once on the wire, broken and frantic. My briefcase is gone. Everything was in there. They'll bury me alive if this gets out. Ethan's reply was ice. You're already buried. The transformation was complete. What had begun as intimidation against an outsider had flipped. Now Ethan and his men jumped at shadows, whispered about footsteps, drank more than they planned. They were the hunted, and Clint was patient. He moved through town invisible, ball cap low, collar turned up. People didn't see him. They saw what they expected, another stranger passing through. He'd learned that trick overseas, blending into hostile streets. One night, he returned to the cabin with a haul from Ethan's trailer, hard drives, memory cards, photographs. He spread them across the table, studying each. Faces at rallies, lists of recruits. Messages that spoke of something bigger than Millbrook. Ethan wasn't just angry at one man buying land. He and his grandfather's generation had been building something broader, a network of hate stitched across state lines. Clint felt the old weight settle on him. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was duty. By the second week, the men barely left their homes without looking over their shoulders. Ethan drank harder. Ray kept a shotgun by his door. Carl's wife begged him to take their daughter and leave town. Frank Miller stopped sleeping altogether, convinced every knock at his office door was federal agents. And Clint, from his hidden vantage, watched it unravel with the precision of a man dismantling a bomb. Clip the right wire. Wait, and the whole device collapses under its own tension. But as he sat in the cabin, night pressing against the windows, Clint knew it couldn't last forever. He was one man. They were desperate now, like cornered animals. And desperate men make mistakes. He just had to be ready when they did. The first trucks rolled into Millbrook before dawn, their engines growling low, headlights off as if secrecy mattered in a town where everyone already knew. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the abandoned grain warehouse, arms crossed, the lantern light sharpening the lines of his face. Men climbed out, one after another, some he recognized, others strangers with accents from Alabama, Tennessee, the Carolinas. They came in beat-up pickups, with rifles wrapped in blankets, coolers full of beer tossed alongside boxes of ammunition. By sunrise, 37 men had gathered. The warehouse echoed with their voices, their boots on the concrete, the metallic clatter of weapons being checked and rechecked. This ain't just about one man anymore, Ethan shouted, his voice bouncing off corrugated steel. This is about making sure our way of life don't get erased. The men cheered, some drunk on ideology, others drunk on actual beer. Carl Dixon stood at the fringe, pale as chalk, his hands shaking. His wife thought he was working a late shift at the dealership. His daughter would be catching the bus in a few hours, innocent and oblivious. Carl's eyes flicked toward the strangers from out of state, men who looked less like neighbors and more like mercenaries. Some were already talking about explosives, about blocking highways, about starting a war. Ray Peters pulled Ethan aside, voice low. These boys ain't here just for Rogers. They're itching for a fight, with anyone. Feds, cops, doesn't matter. Ethan's jaw tightened. Good. We need men with spine. That ain't spine, Ethan. That's suicide, Ray snapped, his one good eye twitching. They're gonna burn this whole county down if you let them. Ethan's answer was a flat stare. Then let it burn. 3 miles away, hidden in the folds of the state forest. Clint Rogers adjusted the lens of his scope. Through binoculars, he had already counted the vehicles, noted the weapons, mapped their likely routes. He had laced the forest with his own preparations, motion sensors strung between trees, non-lethal charges buried at choke points, fallback positions dug into ridges with clear lines of fire. It wasn't about killing them, it was about control, about keeping them inside the box until federal reinforcements could arrive. He checked his watch. 90 minutes until the first tactical teams rolled in from Atlanta. 90 minutes he had to hold 37 armed extremists at bay. He breathed slowly, the same rhythm he'd used in combat zones, letting calm replace fear. The assault began with Ethan's voice over a borrowed military radio. Sweep north to south, no gaps, no mercy. The line of men fanned into the trees, weapons raised, nerves buzzing. Clint let them come. The first explosion thundered 20 minutes later, dirt and debris geysering skyward, harmless but loud enough to rattle them. Contact! Someone screamed. Gunfire erupted, wild, blind, bullets snapping branches. Calm down, Ethan barked. He's one man with homemade bombs. Stay in formation. But formation was already fracturing. Out-of-state fighters surged forward, hungry for action, while locals lagged behind, doubt gnawing at their courage. Clint triggered his second charge at a narrow pass between ridges. Smoke flares popped. Remote devices spat muzzle flashes. From the radios came chaos. Multiple shooters, high ground. We're caught in a crossfire. Negative, negative, just tricks, Ethan shouted, but his words fought against panic. Men dove for cover, firing at phantoms. Clint watched it unfold through his scope, expression flat, heart rate steady. He could end it right there with one shot, Ethan in his crosshairs. But he held his fire. Killing turned men into martyrs. Exposing them turned them into criminals. And criminals could be dismantled in courtrooms where their hate carried no glamour. He keyed his own radio, cutting into their channel. This is Clint Rogers. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and way over your heads. Drop your weapons. Walk out now, and you might live to see tomorrow. The forest froze. Then rage crackled back through static. Ethan's roar. Kill him! Dozens of rifles thundered at once, shredding trees, chewing earth. But Clint was already moving, slipping like smoke to his second fallback. Every bullet they wasted on shadows bought him more time. Back at the warehouse, Frank Miller sat in the shadows, trembling. He'd finally broken, walking outside with a white handkerchief held high when the first FBI helicopters cut across the sky. Agents swarmed him, pinned him down, demanded names. Frank spilled everything. Rosters, bank transfers, meetings. He admitted to writing the checks, laundering the money, buying the gasoline. His words poured out like water from a broken dam, each confession tightening the net. In the forest, Clint's strategy worked exactly as planned. He funneled them toward a logging road, the kill zone. Flashbangs exploded, ears ringing, men scattering. Radios screeched with confusion. We're pinned down. Need backup. Too many shooters. Clint smiled grimly. One man, and yet they believed they were surrounded. Fear had multiplied him into an army, but Ethan refused to yield. This is it, he bellowed. Stand your ground. This is the fight we came for. His voice carried desperation now, the edge of a man watching control slip from his hands. Carl Dixon finally broke. Over the radio, his voice shook. My daughter gets out of school in 4 hours. Ethan, I ain't dying in these woods for your pride. Ray Peters chimed in, panicked. We're surrounded. I can hear helicopters. This ain't what I signed up for. Ethan's reply was venom. Then crawl back to your wives and hide. The rest of us will make history. Clint heard it all, every crack in their unity. He rose from cover, radio in hand, voice steady as stone. Ethan Walker, you've got one last chance. Federal agents are closing in. Drop your guns and nobody else has to bleed. Silence stretched. Then Ethan screamed back, defiant, unhinged. Face me! Man to man! No guns! You win! They go free! I win! You walk away! Around them, even the extremists fell quiet, caught by the madness of it. Federal radios buzzed in Clint's ear. Do not engage, Agent Chen ordered. We have this contained. But Clint understood the psychology. These men needed an ending they could accept, one that didn't leave them gunned down by federal troops. Ethan wanted theater. Clint would give him closure. He stepped into the clearing, rifles trained on him from every angle, hands open. Hold your fire, he called to the agents circling overhead. This ends now. Ethan emerged opposite, wild-eyed, fists clenched. You think you broke me? You think you broke us? He charged, swinging wildly. Clint sidestepped, caught his arm, twisted, and slammed him into the dirt in one fluid motion. Ethan thrashed, cursed, spit. Clint held him down, calm as ever. It's over. His voice carried across the clearing, heavy with finality. Drop your weapons. No one else has to get hurt. One by one, rifles clattered to the ground. Within minutes, the forest was crawling with federal agents, men in tactical gear swarming like an unstoppable tide. 37 extremists were cuffed, searched, loaded into transports. Some shouted about tyranny, others wept. Ethan lay unconscious in the mud, his followers staring at him not as a leader, but as a broken man who had promised glory and delivered humiliation. Clint stepped back, exhaled. For the first time in weeks, he felt the tension ease. But deep in his chest, he knew this wasn't the end. The men had surrendered. Yes, the guns were seized, the evidence secured. Yet hate didn't vanish with handcuffs. Somewhere, he knew, other voices were already spinning the story, turning Ethan Walker into a martyr, painting Clint Rogers as the enemy. The battle was won. The war had only shifted. The smoke of battle hadn't yet settled when Clint Rogers stood at the edge of the clearing, the weight of silence pressing down harder than the gunfire ever had. 37 men were cuffed and hauled away under the watch of federal agents, their rifles stacked like bones on the forest floor. Helicopters chopped the morning air, spotlight beams cutting through drifting fog. Clint rolled his sore shoulder, ribs aching under his shirt, but his eyes stayed sharp. He had seen enough battles to know the shooting might stop long before the war. Agent Machin approached, headset still in place, clipboard under her arm, her eyes scanning Clint with the clinical focus of someone who had already filed 3 reports in her head. Mr. Rogers, she said, voice clipped. We'll need a full debrief. What you've done here. What they did, Clint corrected, eyes still on Ethan Walker, slumped in the mud under heavy guard. I just gave them enough rope. Chen studied him for a beat. Regardless, you've dismantled a domestic terror cell larger than anything we've seen in this region in 20 years. But I have to warn you, it won't end here. Networks like this never stop at one county. Clint didn't reply. He was watching Deputy Jake Morrison, the young officer who had been the only one to offer him a card and a warning weeks earlier. Morrison's face carried guilt, but also determination. He crossed the clearing, extending a hand. Mr. Rogers, I should have done more. I knew something was wrong. I let local politics keep me quiet. Clint clasped his hand firmly. You tried. That's more than most. Not enough, Morrison said, jaw tight. It won't happen again. Not while I'm wearing this badge. For the first time since Millbrook became a battlefield, Clint believed him. By evening, the forest was empty, but for trampled leaves, burned brush, and the faint smell of cordite. News trucks swarmed Millbrook, satellite dishes tilting skyward, anchors rehearsing lines about domestic terrorism thwarted, and veteran hero foils extremist plot. Clint wanted no part of it. He slipped away to Betty Hawthorne's diner, the one place where the coffee was hot and the welcome was genuine. Betty stood behind the counter, apron dusted with flour, eyes soft with both relief and worry. Honey, she whispered when she saw him, what have you gotten yourself into? Clint sat at the counter, exhaustion settling in his bones. Just wanted a quiet life, he muttered. Betty poured him a cup, set her hand gently on his wrist. Sometimes quiet doesn't find us. Sometimes we have to earn it. He didn't stay long. Reporters had already begun knocking on Betty's windows, pressing cameras to the glass. Clint slipped out the back, moving through alleys like he had in cities half a world away. He thought maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind him, but fate had one more lesson waiting. At dusk, a lone pickup rolled through the federal checkpoint at the edge of town. The driver was an old man, tall, shoulders still broad despite age, eyes glinting with a menace sharpened by decades. Clint recognized the resemblance instantly. Ethan Walker's blood ran in those veins. The man introduced himself with a flat voice. William Briggs, Ethan's grandfather. He walked toward Clint, hands open, but his posture radiated danger. You think you ended something here? William's voice carried authority born of command, not bluster. All you did was cut one branch off a tree that's been growing 50 years. Cut one, two more sprout. Clint's gaze hardened. Your branch nearly burned this town to the ground. William smiled thinly. Nearly, but not enough. Now you've given us something more powerful than fire. You've given us a martyr. You've given us you. He held up a phone, screen glowing with dozens of messages. 43 other cells across 7 states. They're already calling, already rallying, and every recruitment poster will carry your name, your face, the outsider who brought the feds down on Millbrook. Agent Chen stepped forward, hand near her weapon. Mr. Briggs, you're under what charge? William cut her off, voice mocking. I haven't broken a law. I'm just a grieving grandfather talking about freedom. He turned back to Clint. You fought wars overseas? You know the truth. Kill a man, you make an enemy. Humiliate a man, you make a cause. You think you won today, soldier? You just lit a fire you can't put out. For a moment Clint saw it, the trap William had laid. Ethan had been reckless, emotional, expendable. The real strategist was the old man, patient and deliberate, who would use today's defeat as propaganda for tomorrow's war. Clint's voice dropped low. You sacrificed your own grandson. William's smile didn't falter. He played his part. Now it's my move. Then he turned, climbed into his truck, and drove away under the flashing lights of federal vehicles, untouchable for now. That night, Clint stood on the porch of Betty's diner with his sister Rose, who had driven 8 hours the moment news broke. She wrapped her arms around him, refusing to let go. The news says you took on an army, she whispered, trembling. They make it sound like a movie, but you're not a headline to me. You're my brother, and I'm not leaving you here alone. Clint wanted to tell her she was safe, but William Briggs's words clung like smoke. Quiet was no longer possible. Not after this. 6 months later, the farmhouse stood rebuilt, stronger than before. Reinforced windows, security systems wired into every room, clear sight lines in all directions. Children's laughter floated across the yard as Rose's kids chased fireflies with mason jars. Clint leaned against the porch rail, ribs healed, shoulders stronger, scars hidden beneath his shirt. Rose appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "Dinner's ready. And before you ask, yes, Betty brought enough casserole for 3 nights." Clint smiled. Betty had become their bridge to the town, carrying both gossip and gratitude in equal measure. That morning had brought unexpected news. William Briggs, the self-styled patriarch, had been arrested at last. FBI agents had traced his network through the very records Clint had secured. 43 cells across 7 states, dismantled in coordinated raids, bank accounts frozen, weapons seized, conspirators in cuffs. For all his boasting, William had been no smarter than the rest. His emails had been monitored, his finances traced, his arrogance, his downfall. Clint relayed the news at dinner, Rose's eyes widening with relief. Betty actually clapped her hands, grinning. "That man's been poisoning this county for half a century. Seeing him hauled off, it's like Christmas morning." She leaned closer to Clint, her voice soft. "You gave us our town back." Clint shook his head. "I just showed them consequences. The rest, they did themselves." Later, as the children released their captured fireflies into the dusk, Clint sat alone on the porch, the night humming around him. He thought of William's warning, of the hate that had spread like rot across counties and states. But he also thought of Betty's granddaughter, now off to college on a scholarship she'd almost never applied for, until she'd seen someone refuse to be intimidated. He thought of Deputy Morrison, who'd promised change and was already investigating corruption inside the sheriff's office. He thought of crime reports Agent Chen had shown him. Hate incidents across the region had dropped 60% since the arrests. Quiet might never come easy. But maybe peace wasn't about silence. Maybe it was about standing long enough, firm enough, until even the loudest hate learned there were consequences. Clint lifted the jar his nephew had left on the porch rail. The fireflies blinked once more before he twisted the lid, letting them drift free into the dark. "Some things," he murmured, "belong in the light." The whistle of a distant train echoed through the valley, the same sound that had greeted him months earlier when he first arrived in Millbrook, searching for a place to breathe. Back then, he had wanted nothing more than to disappear. Now, after all the fire and fury, he understood belonging didn't mean hiding. Belonging meant standing. And in that quiet Georgia night, Clint Rogers finally felt at home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the fight for peace isn't about silence, it's about courage.